Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Elliot Roe. Elliot is a leading expert in mindset optimization for human performers and is the world's #1 mindset coach for poker players. His poker clients have won over $100 million and nearly every major tournament titled, including the World Series of Poker main events. Elliot's clientele also includes Olympic medalists, UFC champions, Hollywood actors, business executives, and Wall Street traders. His unique mindset coaching system leverages the power of hypnotherapy to eliminate fears and break through mental roadblocks, allowing you to operate in a state of peak performance every day. In this week's episode, expect to learn the importance of mental rehearsal, how the best minds in the world think, how to prime your mind, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Elliot Roe, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
My friend, I cannot remember how I came across your work, but I think it might have been through Baby Bathwater. I think you popped up somewhere there, and I was like, this guy sounds like he knows some stuff. So here we are, looking forward to chatting and getting insight into your world today. Can you give the guys a 60 to 90-second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Yeah, so my name's Elliot Roe. I'm a mindset and performance coach. Been doing this since 2010, so got a decent amount of time in now. And I work with high performers in different industries. My background's hypnotherapy, and I use hypnotherapy to help high performers in the CEOs of companies, Wall Street traders, professional athletes, professional gamblers, anyone really where performing at their best under high pressure is worth a lot of money to them. And I help them overcome their issues from the past so they can perform better in the moment.
Very succinct, probably the most succinct biography we've had.
I've said it before.
You've said it, it's not your first rodeo. So, mate, what do you think is the biggest factor or factors for high performers reaching that level on demand? And I use the word on demand intentionally because when there's no pressure and everything, you're able to kind of perform at your best. And then all of a sudden, when there's more on the line, people kind of tighten up or they tense or they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. So what's coming up for people in those situations?
So what I tend to see is the pressure brings on a form of self-sabotage, fear of failure, or fear of success. And those slow you down in some way and they cost you in your performance. So a professional athlete might be uncomfortable with becoming #1 in the world at a subconscious level because they know what that will mean for their family and their level of fame. CEO may struggle with a certain wealth level because they think they're deserving of X but not of Y. Traders might get concerned that well, again, it's usually with the traders, it's wealth levels again, where people just they reach levels where they're uncomfortable with money, and we have to work through those money levels so that they don't feel that they're sort of moving past their station. So a lot of people keep themselves at a certain level, and oftentimes it's linked to self-worth. Am I good enough? Am I deserving? And what would it mean for my relationships if I have that level of financial success? And they're the things I see hold people back from the very highest levels of performance.
I resonate deeply with that. I'm interested to know, I guess the nature of, people like you and I in the coaching space, we have a lot of awareness around patterns and upper limit levels and, glass ceilings and things like that. But for the average person, my guess is that it takes some time for them to discover this unconscious belief or pattern that's playing out. For the average person that's listening to this, what should they be looking for to know, okay, there's a repeat pattern here or something that's kind of in my way?
So the first thing would be, are you seeing a repeating pattern? When it comes to wealth, are you hitting a certain number over and over again? And if you go above it, do you drag yourself back to it? And if you go below it, do you find it quite easy to get back to that number? So that would be that side of things. And that's usually quite easy for people to see. But then also other repeating patterns. So in your relationships, Are you seeing the same pattern with your relationships over and over again? With your staff, if you're running a company, are you seeing the same sort of problems show themselves again and again? Is there an emotion that keeps coming up for you? Are you someone who's particularly anxious? Are you someone who's particularly frustrated? And is that showing up in areas of your life as a repeating pattern? So anywhere that you're seeing something come up again and again and again, and there might be nuances to it, but you can usually start to see a theme. And if there's a theme, probably it's a subconscious program.
So in the world of money,
Mm.
which is a big theme for me this year, what is it about self-worth that's impacting one's ability to earn more? I'm guessing, on a simple level, the level of self-worth is a direct correlation to their income or potentially their ability to hold certain amounts of money. But what are you seeing as the correlation between the two?
So a lot of the time, it's linked to what they think is an acceptable amount of money. So a lot of us have been given numbers through life. So through childhood, your parents might complain about the Browns being down the street, who are wealthy and they don't like rich people because rich people are greedy. And then I'll say, how much did the Browns make? And it's like, oh, they were making $500,000 a year. Where are you stuck? $500,000 a year, right? And you can get stuck on those numbers. Another one is I've got a lot of guys where the number they've been stuck is the most money their dad ever made in a year. And they have this subconscious fear that if they do better than their dad ever did, it's going to change the dynamic of that relationship, as if they're letting their dad down by surpassing him. So that's another way that that can show. And then just general, like you said, self-worth. Um, do you believe the money? Do you believe you deserve the money that you're getting paid for doing a particular job? Are you going to allow yourself to get that money and then hold that money? So a lot of people will, destroy their bank accounts pretty quickly when large sums come in, as we see with lottery winners. They're people who, when money falls out of the sky, people find a way of trying to give it away at a subconscious level so they can get their old life back because it doesn't fit for them. It doesn't fit being wealthy. And that's why you see these professional athletes who've come from poverty and 5, 10 years after their career finishes, they've got nothing. They've gone back to their comfort zone. And it's the same with lottery winners. And, sometimes the same with CEOs who exit. It's not quite as much of an issue because they feel they've done something to deserve it. But oftentimes when someone feels they haven't done something to deserve the success, they'll find a way to give it away.
What I find, because I'm just playing, this is deep for me at the moment. Financial abundance is my theme for this year, and I've been seeing kind of pieces pop up. So I'm kind of making this a little bit about me, but I'm fascinated.
Well, how can I help?
So,
If you want, we can dig into you. Like,
oh, mate,
yeah, yeah.
I'd be fascinated to. I mean, what I see as a pattern for me, I'll give you a tiny bit of story. I don't really want to make this about me, but there might be something that you can pick. So up until July last year, I had a theme of always being able to out-earn bad money behavior, which I get the feeling there's probably some people in your world have got similar patterns. And then my partner and I became pregnant, and I was like, fuck, all right, this isn't okay now. Like there's a little human that I'm responsible for, and I need to get on top of it. So I knew that they were there. For backstory, I went bankrupt 5 years ago. So you don't get to that place without some bad money behaviors.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time over the last 5 years looking at behaviors and making sense of them, pulling them apart. And I was like, okay, I've got to a certain place, but it almost feels like I need to go deeper into the cave to really pull out the root causes. But notice a lot of patterns. And it's really interesting. And I'll be fascinated to see how this shows up in your world. Of all the topics that I've spoken to clients about and done group programs about, sexuality, shadow work, all of it, people don't shit the bed like they do when it comes to money. It's fascinating, but yet no one seems to want to talk about it. And then when you open, I've been really kind of mindful of one's attachment style when it comes to money and seeing how that shows up, anxious and avoidant or anxious avoidant. And I opened the conversation to a group probably 2 months ago, and I think not like 9 out of 10 people could see the patterns within themselves. So I'm guessing, maybe to normalize this, there's a lot of people across different wealth levels that still have bad behaviors. Is that what you're seeing in your world?
Oh, completely. And as I say, this the number is subjective, but it seems
Mm,
almost everyone has a number.
mm,
So it might be you're keeping yourself at $5,000 in your bank account, or it might be 10 million.
mm,
But the person still, that's their level. That's where they're comfortable.
mm,
And, they're giving it away like that. Oftentimes, that can show at any level as well. There are people who get extreme financial success. Again, lottery winners, professional athletes. It's not really possible to out earn bad money habits because you can
mm.
always find a way to give it away. I'm working with traders. You can place one trade that can take away infinite money, and people will find a way to self sabotage and do that sometimes. So I think what you're doing, though, I mean, it's very sensible. If you've had issues with that, you've got a kid on the way. Really digging in and solving this right now is the right path to take.
Well, I think about it every single day. And I think, I kind of look at, I heard Dan Martell talk about a 300% rule recently,
Mm.
100% belief, 100% clarity, 100% of the time. And I was like, okay, I'm taking that into this year and thinking about it every single day and pulling apart different processes to kind of unpack it. What would you do? Obviously hypnosis is your kind of game, but let's say a group of young basketballers will use because they can go from 0 to 100 real quick.
Yeah.
What would you, if you're in a position, whether it be part of the management or the coaching staff, what type of strategies would you implement into, say, their first 1 to 5 years to adjust their mindset, their psychology, the embodiment of financial wealth? What would you do to implement into, say, an NBA team to make sure that these guys didn't fuck things up when it comes to money?
I mean, the first thing I would just try and increase their awareness of their emotions around it
Mm,
as much as I possibly could. So I'd ask them, what are your money stories from childhood? What what do you believe around money? What did you learn about money? What did you learn about wealth and wealthy people? And see what sort of stories they come up with. And some of them are going to say rich people are bad, or money's there to be spent, or whatever story that they've picked up along the way. And then once they have an idea of the background story from childhood, you can start adjusting and changing those stories and help them realize that that's just what's playing out. So a bit like you mentioned this sort of, I always thought I could out earn the bad behavior, or you know the incorrect behavior, whatever it might be. And that's a story you had, and that's the story that you're now starting to change. And everyone is just following narrative. So I believe, I'm very much believe that everything that we're doing is following a story of some kind that we've created, and we just need to change the narrative to change the story, the sort of the future.
why money? Did you have a history with money, and what do you notice about your own money story?
I mean, I worked in investment property and solar energy investments previously. In honesty, the real reason for working in money is a very good way of picking up clients is if you're offering an investment where, hey, I want to work with Elliot on a specific issue, and this issue is worth X million dollars for me to resolve. People are very attracted to working through issues that give them a financial return. So, just from a business perspective, it was a sensible direction for me to focus on.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I found it really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard the language acceptable money. I've never heard it spoken of in those terms. Can you explain? I know you've kind of explained bits and pieces, but can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's when I say like an acceptable amount of money, it's the amount of money that you can personally tolerate. So when you talk about hourly rates for people, there are people with extremely high hourly rates, and there are a lot of people who believe that anything over, $200 an hour is obscene. So for them, $200 an hour is acceptable. For other people, it's 20 times that, 30 times that. But they have told themselves that's the only acceptable amount of money to charge, or an acceptable amount of money to spend. How much should you spend on a vacation? a lot of people, even very wealthy people, have an idea of what is acceptable. And they'll say, I can spend 5,000, I can spend 10,000, whatever it might be. But in their mind, they have a rules list that they're following. But oftentimes that rules list is based on what they grew up with, not necessarily the realities of the financial situation that they're currently living within. So it's looking at, really, again, I'm going to stuck record to some extent, but these narratives that you're playing of what's fair, what's acceptable, what's enough, what's too much, and then um, following those rules subconsciously and self-sabotaging in those situations. There are people who would perform extraordinarily well in an interview if it's $50,000 a year, and the same job at $500,000 a year, they'll probably perform terribly in that interview, um, just because they believe they don't deserve it or it's unjust in some way.
What do you notice about high performers and traits that are similar between them and say kind of the average person, but also traits that are different or are different? The reason I say that is it would be interesting to know in your world what that looks like. But the difference. Sorry, you go.
No, continue.
I was going to say there's a number of traits that I've seen in terms of working with real high performers and big dogs and the rest, but I've also seen traits like people pleasers and people with inability to say no that is across the board. It doesn't matter what level of performance and level they're at. But what are some traits that you see that separate the best and also that don't differentiate the best?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is humans are humans. I've never met a perfect human. Everyone who comes to me, whether they have hundreds of millions of dollars, or are struggling, they're still a human with the issues that humans have. When it comes to the high performers, certain things I see over and over again. Scheduling and having respect for time is a major one.
As in they're good with it?
They're good with ensuring that they're
Yeah.
getting the most out of their time.
Yeah.
Being aware of what the big levers are, so where they can actually create leverage. So everyone who's highly successful has learned what really matters in their industry, and they're pushing that lever. So the professional athlete, they've worked out what is the important thing in their training that moves the needle. The CEO in their particular industry, they understand in their niche what it is that will have outsized impact on their success. And I see that through high performance in every industry. Um, a lot of people who are truly the world's best. I've been lucky. I've worked with a large number of people who've become number one in the world in different industries. I've seen people who truly become number one in the world. They're often very open to what their competition is doing, and they're interested in it rather than judgmental. And when I'm working with like top 30 in the world, there's usually a lot of ego and they're criticizing their competitors. So I've really seen that. Like when you get to the absolute peak, they're like, why is this guy doing this in his training? And when you're at top 30, they're like, that guy's stupid. Why is he doing that? And that's something I've seen as a theme. And then sort of for the people who've been performing for a significant length of time, the self-care is a dramatic piece of the puzzle. So I mean, I've copied the routines of a number of the high performers that I've seen just for my life, and I take it seriously. I've got a personal trainer 5 days a week. I have a massage once a week. I do Reiki every 2 weeks. I have my own coach every 2 weeks. I have a separate business coach that I work with. I use a sauna every or 5 days a week. I won't say every morning; it's not true. I do it 5 days a week. But all of these things like stacking on the self care so I can perform at my best for my clients. Um, I've just effectively seen lots of extremely successful people doing these things, um, and when you follow follow the clues of success, often you see that your performance shifts.
So in terms of your history with hypnosis,
Yeah.
where did it start for you? Why were you interested in hypnosis, and why? And for someone who hasn't experienced hypnosis, how, in really layman's terms, does hypnosis work?
Okay. So I had a fear of flying through childhood. In my 20s, someone recommended a hypnotherapist to help my fear of flying. She resolved it in a single session, which blew my mind. go into this session. It's like guided meditation. It's like not like stage show. It's just like close your eyes, take a deep breath, etc. Um, and then she had me bring up memories related to the sensations I felt around flying, and brought up a memory of being at my grandfather's house, seeing a picture of a plane on the wall, being told it had crashed and killed his business partner, small private jet. Um, I had now an understanding, and then worked through that memory and released the emotion from it. I now had an understanding as why I was scared of planes, and it wasn't a conscious memory. So it was something I didn't know had happened. And when I spoke to my parents, they told me it was real. So I had something show up that we resolved that explained why I had an irrational fear, and it resolved the issue. And because of that, I found it super interesting. I was like, I'm going to go and learn this. So I did a year's course, um, and then started doing hypnotherapy in the evenings with friends and family, as a hobby, basically. And at some stage, it just started going so well, and I was enjoying it so much more than my other work, that I thought I'm actually going to make the switch. And I think that was 2011. I made the full switch, to then being a full time hypnotherapist. So so really, it was I'd had that impact on me, and then I saw that happen. Really, the way hypnotherapy works is it just makes the subconscious mind dominant over the conscious, so you can look at the background programming of what's happening, and then you can adjust it. So memories are malleable, it's plastic. If you think about something that happened in your childhood, the memory is going to be slightly inaccurate. It's not going to be truly exactly what happened. And each time you go back, it will be very slightly different. With hypnotherapy, we can go back to the memories that are traumatic, and we can effectively overwrite them and adjust them and change them. So something that from, 7-year-old you was being beaten up and he was terrified. Um, that's life and death to 7-year-old you. And it might have made you scared of when someone approaches you from behind, or made you uncomfortable in aggressive situations. We can go back to 7-year-old you as your adult self and see it through your adult eyes. We can comfort the child, and we can see that this was a 7-year-old having a fight with another 7-year-old. This wasn't life and death. It doesn't need to have that level of emotion, that level of alarm. And as we overwrite these very emotional memories and adjust them, um, they're no longer there to be triggered when we feel these events in everyday life. So in my case, turbulence on an airplane was triggering the airplanes are dangerous, you're going to die. Your granddad might have died. Um, and we were able to change and adjust that, through hypnotherapy, and I just found it super interesting. It's really effective, but it is nothing like the stage show stuff. There's no clicking of fingers and people collapsing or acting strangely, but you do go into a very deeply relaxed state, like a deep sense of meditation, and you get an understanding of the narratives, the stories that are being told by your mind, that are making you live the life that you're living and have the experience that you're having.
I think with that, as someone who's also studied hypnotherapy, one of the things that I found really beneficial, and maybe you can speak to this, is understanding where else we are being hypnotized or hypnotherapy is showing up. For example, how you get into a deep hypnotic state when you're kind of flicking through your phone or anything like that. So where else might we be getting into somewhat of a hypnotic state without realizing?
So, I mean, the classic one is if you're driving down a freeway and you sort of zone out, and you're support, like, hey, where do those junctions go? And you are capable of driving safely, but you're surprised that you're 3 junctions further ahead. That's just the hypnotic trance state that you're looking for. Or the sensation when you wake up in the morning, you're between awake and asleep. The sort of the manipulation of a daydream, I guess. So not a full dream, slight daydream state. Really, the what we're looking for is you to be in effectively a very vivid daydream state. So it's like close your eyes, take deep breath, going through these processes of relaxation through your mind and body, and then creating strong visualizations of things that aren't there. So I'd like to see a door in your mind. What does the door look like? The door's red. Excellent. Step through that door. You're on the most beautiful beach you could ever imagine. What does that beautiful beach look like? And they'll say, oh, the sun's shining, the sand is, smooth and white, and I can see the water. And they're describing something that doesn't exist, but they're within that. And once someone's in that state, the subconscious is dominant because they're talking to you about things that it's just not reality. So the subconscious mind has then taken over and it's telling these stories. And then that will give us the opportunity to trace back physical sensations and emotions. So then we would go to, how does it feel when, whatever it might be, um, yeah, anxiety response. When you step on stage to give a talk, how does that feel in your body? I feel physically sick. I'm shaking. Okay, when else have you felt this way? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm 8 years old. I know it's show and tell. All the kids are laughing at me. I've stuttered. I'm terrible at public speaking. Whatever memories come up, and usually there's these lists of memories that will show a narrative through their life of them proving that this is something scary. And then we just work through and adjust those memories.
Knowing how impactful the subconscious is,
Hmm.
what do you do on a daily, weekly basis to protect your mind or even to prime it in terms of all the stimulus and everything that can impact us? But what are you doing to be intentional about what you're protecting and priming your mind with?
In terms of my personal routine,
Yeah.
so I meditate when I'm in the sauna. It's sort of like 2 for 1. So I do that, and as I say, I have my own coach, who's also a hypnotherapist. I use her every 2 weeks, and then I'm just sort of have a pretty high awareness with where my emotions are at and the direction that I'm looking to move those, to shift those emotions in. Obviously, self hypnosis is the thing as well, and I'm utilizing that in those moments where, perhaps I've been in a particularly emotional session with a client and I need to clear my mind prior to the next session. But I think really just having sort of clear idea of goals and targets of how you want your days and day and life to be, um, and then just generally working towards those, that clears a lot of the mess. So I've got a good idea of what I want to be doing in life, where I want to be in life, um, and because of that, I can keep myself quite grounded and just sort of continue on that pathway.
So, what's your process like when you notice yourself in a heightened state that isn't necessarily going to produce the ideal outcome? Do you in that moment, are you using breath? Are you using self
So
hypnosis? Are you waiting for you'll take that and go, okay, I need to work on this next fortnight with my coach? What are you doing in that
Oh
process?
no, so I'll almost always do either a hypnosis audio. So I've got an app that I Prime Mind. So that's my own stuff. And then if I don't if I don't want to listen to my own voice, I'll do a breath work app. I use one called Othership. Um, I find both of those. So again, hypnosis audios or breath work is the route that I take if I'm in a particularly anxious state or angry state, or whatever it might be. If I'm looking to clear a specific emotion, I usually use one of those. That's like the quick hack, basically. And then, take a note of it. And then when I have my next session with my coach, we might dig into it deeper and trying to work out where it's coming from. But in terms of state change, breath work and, hypnosis audios, they're very good for a short-term state change. They're not going to resolve the root cause of an issue, but they are going to help you shift how you feel in that moment.
What's the subject or the topic that provides you with the most angst or elevated state these days?
The biggest frustration at the moment is driving my kids on Saturdays to ski school. so, frustration of, I've got a 30-minute driver that's taking us 2 hours at the moment. So I feel that one every Saturday morning. So there's a lack of patience that I have in those moments. I'm quite lucky. I've sort of set up my life in a lot of ways, that it's running quite smoothly. Touch wood. It's everything's going pretty well. I'm really happy with the team that I work with. I'm really happy with the clients that I have, the number of clients that I'm seeing, the amount of self work that I'm doing, the amount of exercise that I'm doing. The way I look after my sleep, my diet. I usually find if you have all of those pieces of the puzzle in place, the extreme emotions show far less frequently. I'm sure if I was, sleeping terribly, if I was getting 3, 4 hours sleep a night, if I was drinking a lot through the week, and if I was, ignoring my self care, I'm sure I'd have a large list of things that were creating those ripples for me, those waves for me. Um, but I find generally, so long as I'm on top of all of those different areas, it has to be something pretty significant for it to shake me at the moment. And obviously, tragedies happen and stressful situations can come up, and I'm dealing with lots of clients, and I'm hearing a lot about a lot of different crises the whole time. um, but in some ways that also helps, because when you see what other people are going through, it does tend to, you know make your problems seem a lot smaller when you're hearing about the intimate details of people struggling with way, way bigger issues than I'm dealing with.
I resonate with that deeply.
Mm.
I moved out of Sydney about 5 years ago, and for the 35 years prior, or the 34 years prior, just and I think for a lot of people, I'm guessing you see this in your clinic, albeit when they come to your world, I'm guessing that's their moment for change. But when you're in it, sometimes it can be hard to see. So I didn't realize how dysregulated I was, how like every area of my life was up and down. And now just piece by piece, rebuilding it literally from the ground up. If I was any less stressed, I reckon I'd be lying horizontal. And, compared to 34 years ago, like, sorry, 5 years ago and the 34 years prior to that, I wasn't sure if I'd ever get to this place. So with that comes a real deep level of attunement to anything that evokes
So
a stressful
yeah.
state within me. I'm right onto it. Um, I find what you said before really interesting about the patience bit for you. And I wanted to go into that a little bit because I think for a lot of people, their response would be to guilt themselves, shame themselves, beat themselves up for being impatient or for feeling a certain way, and therefore push it down and essentially kick the can down the road. So, what would be your recommendation if people do find themselves with big emotions, knowing that for a lot of people they could go one of two ways: push it down, judge themselves, etc., and try to like run away for it, or invite it in and explore it potentially on a deeper level.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost always a child version of ourselves. So mine is clearly I want my own way on a Saturday morning. I'm frustrated.
I get you, brother. I get
Yeah,
you.
they're starting ski school at the peak time, and it seems, the ski school should be later in my mind. But this is a childish viewpoint that I'm showing. And I think that's another key part of this is when you notice these big emotions come up, try and have some grace with yourself and some humor with yourself around it. Like laugh it off. This isn't who you are. I'm rarely impatient. I'm rarely frustrated for whatever reason. This is particularly triggering for me. So I smile and laugh about it with my wife afterwards. Yeah, I was grumpy on the road today. It is what it is. And obviously, sometimes there are more significant emotional issues that come up. If there's a significant anxiety response somewhere, it can be harder to laugh about. But a very significant frustration or anxiety response is usually 5-year-old you showing up when he shouldn't, or 10-year-old you showing up who, for whatever reason, was having a tough time at that age and built out a program that means these triggers create large amounts of stress. And I think it's, as I say, deal with it with grace, deal with it with humor, but accept that it's there and there's work to do. Anytime we feel an irrational emotion showing itself, so it's at a 9 or a 10, and the situation other people would find is a 5 or a 6, that's your sign of that's where you should go and do the work with a coach. So, take a note of it. Hey, this particular situation created a 10 out of 10 frustration response for me. Okay, that's your work. That's what you write down, that's what you go and do.
I think what you said there is really significant for people to understand that acting like a child isn't actually just a metaphor. It's
Yeah.
it's much bigger than just a metaphor, which people don't. The majority of people don't think understand the significance of that. But it is actually your child acting out. It's not just a metaphor when you are childish or etc. As you kind of mentioned there before.
Yeah, so if you think about at the airport when people get told their plane's cancelled and the different responses that show themselves, and then you see 50-year-old men throwing a tantrum, that's not how he acts at work.
Mm.
That's not how. But 5-year-old him has shown up because he's not getting his own way and he's not getting at home to see his kids. And he has learned that throwing a tantrum is a way to get his needs met.
Mm.
and he's just doing what he believes works subconsciously at the time, which is if I throw a big enough tantrum, my needs are going to be met, and obviously then they end up in an embarrassing situation. But it is just 5-year-old version of that person. And if you're in a fight with your partner, there's oftentimes you're in a fight with 15-year-old them. You're not in a fight with 42-year-old them. So I think once you start viewing everything like this and these irrational responses in this way, it becomes easier to deal with other people. And again, have some grace for them, have some grace for yourself. We're all trying to work through something that makes no sense. We're living on a rock in space. You know, it's have some humor with it, and don't worry. Generally people understand when they were wrong, even if they can't admit it. And we're all going through our own stuff.
When it comes to mastering your emotions, I think it'd be easy to fall into the category of numbing or suppressing your emotions and thinking that that is a form of mastering them. What's your approach like when it comes to mastering emotions?
Well, almost exactly what I just described is really look out for the places where it makes no sense. And then hey, that's my work for this week. That's my work for this month. And just every time those things come up, like chip away at them, chip away at them, chip away at them. And I don't believe any of it's binary. I don't think, in general, when we're working on a particular issue, it's not an on-off switch. Even when I described my fear of flying, like it was a very irrational 9 or 10 out of 10 that I used to have when I was younger. Um, Working on it took it down to like a 4 or 5 out of 10. So if there's crazy turbulence, I don't love it. But I can get on the plane and it's sleep if I need to, relax, enjoy it. So long as it's not crazy. And I think it's that with just general frustration, general anxiety, whatever it might be, you're looking to just gradually turn that dial down. Be aware of it, turn the dial down. Be aware of it, turn the dial down. And that's how I see that as a working framework. Is the more awareness you can have, the easier it is to find where you need to do the work.
So what does it tend to be like for, say, professional athletes? What's the mindset that they go in with? Is it there's a lady here in Australia, Emma Murray, who spoke to something that really resonated with me in terms of people's A game and B game. And she
Mm.
spoke about the fear of failure, the fear of judgment, and an unhealthy attachment to the result. And I was like, fuck, all three of those for me in major like challenges that I've done take me out of my A game into B game. So for you, what are the obviously there's the hypnosis component, but what also are the mindset elements that you're implanting in these guys in terms of, whether it's taking the pressure off or handling themselves under pressure? What's the stories that you're getting them to repeat themselves?
So there'll be the sort of subconscious work that we were describing there. So working through, hey, where is that fear of judgment coming from? Where's the fear of failure coming from? Where's the fear of success? Why are you so tied to the results? So we do the deeper work on that. And then as we move into visualization, one of the things I'll do with professional athletes is instead of being extremely positive visualization, I'll have them visualizing overcoming obstacles and difficulties within their sport. And I think that's the most powerful way to visualize sports performance. So let's say I work with a UFC fighter, if you have, if that's a sport you know much about, but instead of having them visualize walking into the octagon and throwing a punch and knocking out their opponent, I'll have them visualize being trapped on the bottom and having to escape, or being trapped against the cage and remaining calm and talking through the process of what do we do now? What do we do now? What do we do now? So that when they're in these difficult moments, they're not panicking, but their subconscious is already to follow the game plan of seeing that even though the fight is going against them, they they understand there's still a route to success, so they don't sort of stop trying effectively. When it comes to professional poker players, I've worked with a lot of gamblers over the years. When they visualize a final table, we won't have them visualize just dominating the final table, coming in with chip leader and then winning. It'll be a case of the chips coming and going, and you're in first place, and then you lose half your stack to a bad beat. You're now in fifth place on the final table. How do we now reset for the next hand? How do you make sure that you're still thinking clearly, even in these high stress moments? And with that mental rehearsal, they're able to stay more present in the moment in the particular sport or activity, and that allows them to perform much better. Because really, with someone who's spent 20,000 hours training something, all you want them to be is in a flow state and be present, and then allow their mind to know what it should do.
Mm.
Like just to follow the program. So we're just looking for ways to keep them in that present state, even when things are going against them. And it's an extraordinary edge to have over your opponents, because most people aren't capable of doing that. And as something starts to go against them, they start to panic and they start to perform more, at a lower level.
Do you find it as bizarre as I do that there's not more professional athletes considering the likes of your work, etc.? I mean, I don't know if you've been to Australia or if you know our game. We have a game called Aussie Rules or Australian football. And these guys are making big bucks to kick a football through two sticks
Yeah.
under pressure. And if you continue to spray it, because I think the accuracy over the last 20 years has gone down,
Okay.
I cannot understand why they wouldn't be going and working hypnosis or some form of psychological work in order to, that's, especially for forwards. And again, I'm sure you can reference it in your sports, but that's your job, buddy, to kick it through the big sticks. Does it still confuse you as to why there isn't more of this? And I know a lot of sports, the NBA and stuff are kind of progressive and moving further forward, but are you confused by the lack of work in this space?
I think it's culture. So I think they're used to cultures where, anything along the lines of therapy is seen as weakness. And I think certainly the hyper masculine sports,
Mm.
that's something that shows up and is only gradually starting to change. You need, in certain sports, you need to have key people start to talk about this as a key to their success. And once you have that, then everyone else follows. But it can be quite difficult to get the first person not only to be working on it, but then be comfortable with sharing that they're working on their mindset. So we're saying now, hey, they're not working on it. They might all be working on it and they're scared to talk about it because they don't want to be embarrassed, because we just don't know. I've got tons of clients who, they don't talk about the work I do publicly. I don't get testimonials from them because they just don't want it out there that they're working on their mindset, because that's something that is still in some sports and in some industries, it's not something you do.
Isn't that fascinating? I'm sure, I assume you can see it as clearly as I, that it's
Oh,
it's the golden ticket, brother. Here's the
yeah.
golden ticket. Here's the
I
golden
mean,
ticket. Do you want it or not?
it's do you want to perform X percentage better, and how much
Mm,
money is that worth to you? And really, this isn't magic. You can't take someone who's not good and make them good. But
mm.
the difference between someone's A game and their B game is usually pretty substantial. And if you can get them playing their A game more often than they usually do, for a professional athlete, that's extraordinarily valuable.
Mm. Mate, for those that want to find out more about your work and what you do, where's the best spot to send them?
So if you go to elliotroe.com, so that's my main website, or I've got an app that's on iPhone and Android called Primed Mind. If you look that up, you can download it for free. There's a load of audios. I think there's like 40 different audios that are just free. And then there is an upgrade as well, but that's primedmind.com.
Beautiful. And what type, in terms of the types of audios, is it certain
So
topics that you're talking about, or
I
what's?
think we've got about 400 audios in total on the app, and it's
Mm,
everything from confidence, anxiety, public speaking, sleep. That's our most popular section. Winner's mindset, determination, and then specifics for different sports, different activities. So, I mean, there's about 400 audios. There should be something for everybody. So, yeah, check it out.
beautiful. Elliot, great to have you on the podcast.
Hey, Ben, really appreciate it. Thanks for the chat.